Hello, Brother Monroe here. Welcome back to Sea Power, and a very special video because we have a very special guest for Christmas, Drakinival of naval history and naval, all things naval, I think, nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Hello
Yeah.
again.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming back to the channel. You were last here doing uh, the the Battleship League, which was
Yes.
awesome. But today we're looking at something very different. We're going outside what the kind of normal era that you kind of cover on your channel,
Yeah.
but you are very, very knowledgeable about the 1980s and the Royal Navy. Um, and
Yeah. As I've said to people on my channel, it's not that I don't know anything about post 1950s naval designs, etc. It's more the fact that partly it involves discussing modern politics, because let's face it, anyone who does a Falklands video is going to get at least a few Los Malvinas son Argentinas type people showing up, which is just boring. And also, you end up in the realm of, I could tell you what this missile's range is, but that's classified, so I don't want to.
yes, the curse of
Whereas
going.
with this kind of thing, it's like, well, the game says the missile does this, therefore we're just going to, smile and accept it.
Sure, the missile does that. Sounds good. Um, so, what we're going to do today, because I was playing Sea Power, I've been working on a few
Yeah.
mods for the Royal Navy. Um, so we now have Type 21, Type 22, Type 23, all
Hmm.
functional in game. Um, we also have the Type 42 and the Type 82, also functional in
Hmm.
game, along with Invincibles. So we've got most of the Royal Navy roster complete. And one of the fun things about playing a game is you can read about, hey, problems and with the Type 42, and in the Falklands they always wanted to put them together with a Type 22 to kind of have that double up between the Sea Dart and the Sea Wolf. But until you play a game, you don't really realise just quite how essential that feels. And what I was kind of realised when I was playing was why. Well, I know why, but it, definitely the Type 42 was quite old by the kind of mid 80s, 83, 84.
Yes.
And the replacement didn't show up until what, 2005 or something crazy in the
Hmm.
Type 45s. So what if, rather than the people who were in charge, we put someone who actually knew what they were doing in charge, who
Yeah.
actually wanted to build a ship, and what would a potential replacement for the Type 42 look like that was kind of designed and ordered in 83 or 84 with a service, it projected service in service date of kind of 89 to 91 ish
Hmm.
at a push. And that was kind of my idea. And then I thought, yeah, well, I mean, I can make a best guess, but why not actually talk to someone who knows what they're who knows what they're doing and who knows what
Yeah.
they're talking about? So, am I right in thinking that the Type 42 by kind of 83, 84, probably the Royal Navy would have very much liked to get a replacement for it?
Yes, and there's a few different grounds for that. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, the Type 42 was they were still building them, but they were getting a little bit old by that point. Bearing in mind that the first Type 42 was actually ordered in the late 1960s and enters service in the mid 1970s. Now, okay, by the Falklands War, that's only 7 years, but you're talking about, it's been 7 or 8 years since the first ship was ordered before it actually commissions. And the Royal Navy is very conscious of two things. Firstly, that the Type 42 was very much a stopgap, a stand in when CVA-01 was cancelled and they were told, well, you're not getting any more Type 82s, aka the Bristol class, as a result of that. So it's not what they wanted to start with. And Type 42 is very much a kind of what is the minimum viable product that we can get and have a Sea Dart missile system installed. and you can kind of see that when you look at its overall capability. It's got a single twin arm launcher, and it, until you get to the later batches, it can't even carry 24 missiles. So there's not a huge magazine depth on it. It's kind of, as I said, a very cheap minimum viable product, which is what the Royal Navy basically could get away with, because at the time, even though the government way back in the 60s and early 70s had cut the knees out of from under the Royal Navy with cancellation of CVA 01, the Royal Navy still had a lot of overseas commitments, and so, as well as on paper being a cheap per unit item, which helped the Treasury get sign off, it also meant you could, in theory, build a fair number of them, which meant you could be in multiple places at once, which is what was still being demanded of the Navy. But it was appreciated, certainly by the end of the 70s and going into the 80s, that things had changed. Firstly, there were new developments, or perhaps newly found developments from intelligence in terms of what Russian anti-shipping missiles could do, specifically the ones launched from aircraft. And the premise behind the original Sea-Dart system, and therefore to an extent the Type 42s, had been that the Russian bombers would have to come into range, and so Sea-Dart was designed to shoot down the bombers before, obviously, the bombers could then find and launch their own weapons on what would presumably be mostly reforger convoys going back and forth across the Atlantic. The problem was the newer Russian missiles had a range that meant they could be launched well outside the combat range of even a theoretical radar picket Type 42 armed with Sea-Dart. And the missiles themselves were also a lot more capable. And, in terms of things like, they're going to be now sea skimming rather than flying high and diving down and that kind of stuff. And that meant the Royal Navy was actually very conscious of the fact that they needed to pivot towards a system that was more geared to shooting down incoming missiles, which are smaller, faster, and harder to hit, than big Tu-95, Tu-16, or Tu-22 or 22M bombers, which would, in theory, be flying really high and nicely silhouetted against the background of space for the radar. And in that vein, what they had done in the late 70s was look into a series of designs for what could potentially be the successor to Type 42. The problem being that at the end of the 70s, you had new elections, so Margaret Thatcher's first government came in, and you ended up with one John Knott as the Defence Secretary, who decided that he was going to try and basically murder the Royal Navy and turn it into a small anti-submarine flotilla for NATO, because, they were supposed to be making budget cuts generally, but he seemed to have this weird idea that somehow the relatively small population nation that is Britain would play a vital role on the front line of a mass infantry and tank engagement in West Germany. And the historical thing we're not very good at versus the bit that we usually are very good at, which is putting a relatively small number of people in a bunch of big ships and going around and blowing people up. That was the thing he was going to try and get rid of the most.
Yes. Let's assume that he has been possibly just fired after the Falklands for going, we're not going to need a navy. Oh, actually, we kind of do need a navy.
And in the fine spirit of Futurama, he was then ground into a fine powder, with the powder sold to the Royal Navy as a bomb. So if we're assuming that it's 1983, and let's face it, between the handful of exocets the Argentinians did manage to fire off and a few other things, well, we're short a few Type 42s now, and the case has been made that we need these new ships that are far more capable. Personally, given that it's a somewhat of a rush job, rather than going completely clean slate, I would look at what the Royal Navy had been looking at as a Type 42 successor, which is the Type 43. Mm-hmm. Now, the Type 43 picture hopefully appearing somewhere on screen right now, let's just say it was not the world's most aesthetically pleasing design.
It's certainly interesting looking.
Yes, so it was considerably larger than a Type 42. and probably, actually merited the term destroyer, whereas the Type 42 was more named a destroyer largely because it had a primary anti-aircraft role. It's actually smaller than some other frigates, but nonetheless. So the Type 43 was designed to carry a lot more missiles and generally be overall far more capable. There's a fairly good chance it probably would have been a 9 to 10,000 ton ship or so. There are estimates that were prepared at the time that said, oh no, it's going to be around 8,000 tons. Basically, everyone who's looked at them, including actually the chap who designed it, D.K. Brown, who included it in one of the books that he wrote after he retired, pretty much all admit that was essentially a lie to get the Treasury to sign off on things. But as we can see, transitioning from just a general drawing over to a line drawing, the idea was to enhance survivability by separating the weapon systems as much as humanly possible, i.e. bunch of weapons right aft and bunch of weapons right forward. And that also meant splitting the machinery, hence the two widely spaced funnels, which then meant that, okay, yeah, if you took a hit from a big Soviet anti-shipping missile, if you were hit anywhere, it would probably cripple the ship. But in theory, the ship would still be able to fight back, even if it was dead in the water. And this led to a few interesting design choices. And the main one, of course, being that the helicopter is placed amidships, which is not an ideal position for a helicopter. I mean, they can land vertically and so forth, but I don't think there's any helicopter pilot on the planet who'd want to voluntarily try and land a helicopter in between the superstructures of a ship.
No, probably not. And certainly in the game, they all want to try and land from the aft of the ship, coming in over the stern.
Yeah, there was some inspiration in this case from the town class cruisers of pre-World War II vintage, in as much as the hangar was built in right behind the bridge, except of course that in those cases they were using float planes, so you'd catapult them off the side and then pick them up with a crane and put them back on, whereas with a helicopter they've got to do the whole takeoff and landing thing from the flight deck themselves, which it'll be a bit interesting. But there is a certain method to the madness outside of, hey, we want the weapons as far apart, so therefore this is the only place you can land. The other thing is that it's pretty much close to the center of rotation of the ship, so in theory it would be slightly easier to land on in terms of if the ship is pitching and rolling, this is the bit of the ship that's not going to move quite as much. Whereas I'm sure we've probably seen, videos of some poor old Fleet Airline pilot trying to land on the stern of a Type 23 when the sea's up and the stern's going up and down by 20 feet. But anyway, so what this ship had was a pair of twin-arm Sea Dart launchers, so that's immediately twice the firepower of a Type 42, with a full set of directors and tracking radars fore and aft, plus a 4.5-inch deck gun, because you always have to have one of those, and some Exocet launchers stuck on the back. And unlike the Type 42, wherein if someone shot a missile at you and you didn't hit it with Sea Dart, your only other hope of defense was a couple of 20mm Orlikans, in this case you actually had a set of Seawolf launchers. So these are the sextuple sort of rotary launchers that you see on other 1980s Royal Navy ships, and there are four of them, essentially two with one each side of the bridge and two with one each side of the aft radar systems. So it had long-range missiles, short-range missiles, plus a helicopter, plus some Exocet launchers, because at that point that's what we were using instead of Harpoon, strapped on the back. And the missile magazines were also going to be considerably deeper than the ones that you could find on a Type 42. So that was the idea of the 43. That all gets cancelled by John Nott, and the Royal Navy does try and save the program somewhat. They come up with what they dub a kind of a Type 2 Type 43, which is then evolved into a what they also term a Type 44, which, to be honest, it basically looks like a slightly different, somewhat smaller Type 42 with just a single twin-arm Sea Dart launcher up front. So it's not a great improvement, but it's something. But that gets cancelled as well. The main reason why they're going for a bigger design and then trying to salvage it with perhaps even just a smaller design is that this is also supposed to be paired with what at the time is termed GWS 31, Guided Weapons System 31, which is essentially, or aka Sea Dart 2. And Sea Dart 2 had a 2-stage projected development program, the first of which was to offer a Sea Dart missile that had a slightly longer range as well as mid-course guidance, whereas Sea Dart, the original, the one we all know, was a beam rider. So you could only fire as many missiles as you had director radars, because the minute you switched that radar off, the missile didn't know where it was going. Whereas with the mid-course adjustment version, you could say, okay, you go here, and off it goes. You can fire off a bunch more missiles, and then as that missile gets close to the target, you can then illuminate the target and go, okay, actually, we're going to get you to switch course slightly and go over here, and then so you're only actually illuminating and directing that missile very briefly, which means you can then switch to the next and the next and the next, which allows you to get more missiles in the air. And then the second stage of the 2-stage program was to also look at potentially a vertical launch system, which some of that work, I mean, it was very theoretical before the system got cancelled, but some of that work would notionally lead into what we would eventually get with vertical launch Seawolf.
Yeah.
But the idea in the end was to end up with an extended range, at least mid-course adjustment, vertical launch Sea Dart version. There's some potential talk about also giving it an active seeker so that you could do mid-course adjustment, but then once you got into range of the target aircraft, you didn't have to continuously illuminate. You could just go, look, it's here. Okay, great. You've got it. Short range, fine, fantastic. Go engage, which again will increase the number of missiles that you can utilize at any given time. That's a little bit more speculative, though. Because essentially that would involve strapping the seeker head from a air-to-air missile, like at that point a Sparrow or something, onto it. Okay. And for those of you in the background who might be yelling, where are you getting all this information, Drac? There's actually, well, in terms of easily accessible sources, there are 2 primary places to go, one of which is a book by Norman Friedman called British Destroyers and Frigates, the Second World War and After, and the other one is by D.K. Brown, the Royal Navy engineer who was actually in charge of the Type 43 program, so kind of knows what he was talking about. And that is called Rebuilding the Royal Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. I'll try and find links to those books and put them down in the video description as well. So that's kind of where the Royal Navy was. So, you know, you're in charge, and you've got the old Type 43 plans. How would you adjust them to get something under construction quickly? And then would you do a kind of a second version which incorporated some of the kind of more advanced ideas as a batch 2?
Yeah, so I would look at taking the Type 43, because as we said, this is going to be an emergency thing, so we're not going to just do clean slate. We're going to take the Type 43 and see what we can adapt out of it. My personal solution, if this is up to me, would be to abandon the idea of the amidships helicopter deck. It's not really the best thing from a longevity for helicopter pilots perspective. And I would then move the aft superstructure essentially forward to create a more conventional looking ship. And one of the reasons I would be doing this is that in the interim between the start of the Type 43 design and our theoretical departure point in 1983, the US Navy has actually begun to launch a series of ships that are very, very similar to a Type 43, and that's, of course, the Ticonderoga class cruisers. They have another deck gun aft, but if you shift the superstructure forward and then put the helicopter and hangar deck just aft of the new superstructure, you end up with something that looks very, very much like a Ticonderoga, minus the aft deck gun. And of course, the fact that this is a purpose-built design, whereas with the Ticonderogas, it was we've got this little destroyer-frigate hull. We're going to slap an almighty cubic superstructure on top, and call it a day. So that would be my instinct. Kind of take some themes from what at that point is the latest and greatest in US anti-aircraft warfare with the Ticonderogas, and essentially create a British version. So we would have a Sea King operating on an aft flight deck directly aft of the superstructure, and behind that we would have a Sea Dart launcher. We'd still keep our 4 sextuple Seawolves in their relative positions to the superstructure. We've still got our Exocets on the back, and we've got our 4.5-inch deck gun up front if we want to keep that, with Sea Dart 2. The other attraction of doing it this way, well, which is quite amusing, is actually a note in D.K. Brown's book where he actually says the big type, i.e. the one with the amidships hangar, could have been adapted quite quickly to take Aegis. And he says, we looked.
Okay.
So essentially what we're creating is in many ways a Royal Navy purpose-built, not a Tycho, but almost. Mm-hmm. And given that the Tychos come out initially with twin swing-arm launchers, it means that, yes, I think in our scenario we're sticking with all British, so Sea Dart 2 and Seawolf.
Yes.
But if you wanted to take that hypothetical a step further, you could also say that that at some point the Royal Navy might decide instead of Sea Dart 2 to go with standard missile systems and Aegis radar, at which point, well, if this thing basically is a Tycho with a white ensign strapped to it, it will be incredibly easy to adapt to the purpose.
Yeah, and it would certainly help getting them into service. Mm-hmm. If you could just take the Tycho's designs and kind of adapt them a bit. Certainly in terms of creating it in the game, that makes things a lot easier for me, because I can literally do that. I could just take a Tycho and change it around a bit, and I can certainly create something similar to that batch one kind of picture. How many batch ones do you think the Royal Navy would be able to get away with getting past the Treasury?
So I think we'd be looking at, if the Royal Navy was going to do things cleverly, you would be selling this as a replacement for the Type 42s, which we're acknowledging are now, not really viable. You can get some money from selling off the Type 42s, because let's face it, with pretty much anything the Royal Navy builds in the Cold War period, the Treasury or the MOD condemn them as, oh no, there's no more life left in these things, and then we sell them off to usually random South American countries, where they then go on to have another 20 years of life. So we could sell off some of the Type 42s, keep some of the others around for a little bit, because obviously it's going to take a while for these things to come into service. My personal theory is that what they should do is aim for a 1-for-1 replacement. So you've got 6 batch 1s, of which, of course, Sheffield and Coventry have just been lost. You've got 4 batch 2s, and at the time that we're theoretically looking at, you've got the batch 3s pretty much in the process of getting ready to commission. Manchester's in service, but York, Gloucester, and Edinburgh are not at this point. And that's my starting point. So we'd say there are 14 Type 42s. We want to replace them with 14 Type 43s, and that gives you room to negotiate with the Treasury on how this is going to work, because obviously now there are technically only 4 batch 1s because of the 2 losses. At which point you could then negotiate down, as I said, with the Treasury and say, okay, well, we want 6, and we absolutely need something to replace the 2 lost ships. But then, as the Treasury gets a little bit more pernickety, you could say, okay, look, okay, fine, we will sacrifice 2 ships from our batch of 6, and we'll only build 4. But ultimately, given that each ship has more firepower than 2 Type 42s, because you've got 2 launchers instead of 1, and each launcher has more missiles, and obviously the missiles are more capable, we're actually still, quids in terms of overall capability. And 4 would, to replace the batch 1s, that actually makes a degree of sense, because the batch 1s would be, they're laid down in the early 70s, they've entered service in the mid to late 70s. If we're going through, a rush design phase, we could maybe start laying down the Type 43s by late 1984, early 85. And with the build time and commissioning time, these things are only going to commission in the late 80s, which means that the batch 1s at that stage are going to be between 10 and 15 years old, which, given their minimal design in the first place, is probably the right time to be letting them go, but also means they've still got a reasonable amount of whole life on them, so you can perhaps get a little bit more money when you hawk them off to Chile or whoever.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then presumably the Royal Navy isn't too sad, because they're going to want some batch 2s or possibly even batch 3s afterwards.
Yeah, so what my idea there would again, we'd stick to we want 1-for-1 hull replacements, so we'd be looking at 8. But obviously you're going to have the Cold War ending around about the time that you'd want to be looking at laying down the batch 3s, or at least the indications would be there. So let's say we're laying down the batch 2 Type 43s. If the batch 1s have been laid down in, let's say, early 85, the batch 2s are going to be laid down in late 86, early 87, which means the batch 3s at the earliest are going to be laid down in very late 88, maybe 89, by which point the writing's kind of on the wall for the USSR. And that's being optimistic. So, if you advance each of those blocks by 6 months or so, you could end up with a batch 3 laydown date of maybe even late 89, early 90.
Yeah,
by
so
which point, that's it.
Cancelled, aren't they?
Yes, which again, it's kind of a bit of ablative armor, because then the Royal Navy can put their hands up and say, "Look, okay, we'll let you take away batch 3. We're going to sacrifice 4 out of our 8 additional ships, but we want to keep batch 2." And at that point, batch 2 is well underway, so the argument definitely can be made, which would mean that you'd have 8 ships, 4 batch 1s and 4 batch 2s, which, it's not great in overall numbers wise, but capability wise, that's actually quite a good set of ships to have. And given that the Ticonderogas would be, the later Ticonderogas would be built with vertical launch missiles, and as we said, there was a view to getting Sea 2 to have vertical launch at the second stage of its development, I would argue that potentially the batch 2s and the never-to-be batch 3s might then, much like the Tychos, simply replace their twin-arm launchers with vertical launch cells.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, especially if the Royal Navy kind of knows that batch 3 is never going to be built. They're going to say, well, okay, we'll cancel them, but in return, we want the batch 2s to be the VLS system ones, because we're not getting anything else for like a decade plus.
Yes. And of course, and then you do obviously have that sideline of what happens if we do end up buying Aegis. Well, the first VLS Aegis Tychos are laid down in 84, 85. So the whole thing is entire. If we buy Aegis, it's absolutely going to happen that batch 2 is going to be VLS. And even if we stick with Sea 2, it'd be very easy to point to that and go, hey, look, we're just doing what the US is doing. We're keeping up with technology.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Absolutely. Yes, very interesting. Well, I think by the power of moving magic, I'm going to get my modding hat on and I'm going to create something based on the sketches and the kind of design that we've laid out, and I will see what I can make.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic, I suppose we should probably think about what we should call them.
Yes, that's a good point, actually.
Because the Type 42s are essentially town class. So the Royal Navy has a habit of doing ships named after various towns and cities in the UK, and in this case, it's no real difference. I would argue, since these are bigger ships, we go with a county naming system, which also works because the county class destroyers that the Royal Navy built in the early Cold War are actually at this point literally just being decommissioned and sold off.
Mm-hmm.
So we could go with a number of historic names. I think for batch one, we should look all the way back to the county class heavy cruisers. So I would go with Norfolk and Suffolk, because those are very important county class cruisers from the Second World War. You've got Bismarck and Scharnhorst chases that they're involved with. In Norfolk's case, Suffolk is Bismarck, and various other operations. So they're kind of some of the more high achieving county class cruisers. And given that obviously Coventry and Sheffield have just been sunk, you could I think maybe although you're not going to reuse the names, you could do Devonshire and Cornwall. And Devonshire's involved with the sinking of Bismarck as well, but Devonshire and Cornwall are both obviously notable for being sunk by Japanese aircraft near the start of the Japanese involvement in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a acknowledging without acknowledging, if you like.
When I was looking into names as well, I think Cornwall is put down as one of the Batch 3 Type 23 names. So when I looked into, because I made the Type 23 mod, so if we were to avoid a duplicate name, perhaps Dorsetshire or...
Yeah, that could work.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the batch twos, I would probably, because the Royal Navy is going to box clever and definitely want to guard the batch twos against being cancelled, especially given this, let's say, the political tensions that were running high in the UK at the time, I would name each of the batch twos after a county in each of the constituent parts of the UK. So for Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. So for England, I would go with Northumberland. For Ireland, I would go with Antrim, because Antrim is literally just being sold off in '84 and is probably the easiest to pronounce of the Northern Irish counties. Then for Wales, it's a little bit of an interesting one because all the Welsh ones are shires. Personally, I'd go with either Pembroke or Pembrokeshire because of the connections that the Royal Navy has with that area, with the old Pembroke dockyards and everything. But obviously, choices may vary. And then for Scotland, I would go with either one of two options, which is either Berwick, which is right on the south border, because Berwick was another county class from World War II, or for extra hilarity, I might go with Sutherland. Simply because it's pretty much the most northern of the land of the sort of the main landmass Scottish counties, but named after the south.
Yes, yeah, I quite like Sunderland. I can definitely do all those names. I think I had down Penrith for some reason. That's probably just me putting down the wrong P name. I'll change that to Pembroke. But we can actually have a look at these in game if I'm able to switch. So this is a Type 43 batch 1.
Obviously using Tycho infrastructure.
Yeah, importing models into the game is on the way.
Yes,
but because all the mods are done through Steam Workshop. You have to own the model, so you can't just rip a model off of another game, which is how a lot of mods used to be done in the past. But this would be a custom model anyway, and I don't know how to use Blender, so
Join the club.
yeah, no, it's kit bashing, which I'm very familiar with from actual models doing that. So yeah, it is a typo.
And to be fair, if we had gone down that secondary timeline of the Royal Navy saying we want Aegis, as DK Brown said was possible, then it might actually very well have looked even more like this. Either with standard missiles, but then that would be boring because essentially it's just a Tycho with a white ensign and one less gun.
Yeah, that's
or in this case, this is a C-Dart-2, but with flat panel radar. Although, imagine the various director domes, for those of you in the audience. And unless one of you in the audience wants to draw up a 3D model based on
yes,
based on the sketch.
If you have Blender skills, I know how to import them. So if you want to actually make a 3D model of the ship, get in touch. That's definitely something that's doable. But yes, so 4 to off, we've got the Mark 8, the classic classic gun that's fitted to basically every Royal Navy ship, and then we've got the first of the twin arms. And here we have the GWS 31 C-Dart 2, as imagined by me. As kind of alluded to at the start, 80 nautical miles seems reasonable. I found, I think that was the range of the block, not the Mark II, but the Mod 2.
Mod 2, yes.
Ended up entering service anyway.
So they're very important for the audience. C-Dart Mod 0123, that's modifications of the original C-Dart. That's completely different from what the C-Dart 2 program was going to be, which we talked about already.
Yeah. So this is at base, and I think it's a RIM 66H. So it's an SM2 Block 2 MR, I think, off the top of my head, that I used as the base, and then I adjusted the range and speed to more kind of fit C-Dart type capabilities. It says there's no mid-course correction, because what the game means by this and what actually happens seems to be quite different. If I enable this, basically every missile just dumps into the sea. Which, maybe that's historical, who knows? But they do seek onto targets as guided by the ship, which is what kind of we were talking about as a capability. I didn't add active radar homing, although I could have done. I kept it as a semi-active radar homing that's guided onto the target by the ship, basically.
Yes, which is pretty much what it should be, because the active radar homing was a kind of, maybe in the second wave of C-Dart 2 improvements we might get this, but that was far less concrete than making it a vertical launch system.
Midships, we have, I still need to work on this, but I'm going to pretend that these are the the Seawolf, just the GWS 25 these do say they have mid-course correction, but they don't. They are fired by the ship and guided directly by the ship onto target. And I'm just using these as a convenient proxy, because it's very hard to get the game to put a model of a launcher in to the superstructure without it looking really weird. And then we've got 2 phalanx up here on the midsection, just to kind of provide that third layer of anti-missile defense. Although, if you're relying on these, something is going wrong.
And then this is a sort of historically most likely what the Royal Navy would have done, because obviously the original Type 43 doesn't feature phalanx, but in the sort of immediate post Falklands War environment, the Royal Navy definitely brought in phalanx on the Type 42s. So if they are developing a Type 43, they're definitely going to be bringing that in as well. And it's a good position to put them in.
Yeah. We then have a hangar with a single Seeking, which I can actually make it fly out if I try. I think a Seeking was on the drawing that you sent.
Yes.
For the batch one. So I thought, yep, Sea King gives it a bit of an all-round capability because it's a pretty good ASW helicopter. Plus, another mod maker has already made the Sea King has HAS5, so that's really easy for me to just add in.
Yeah.
Then we've got the second Sea Dart launcher. A blank space where the Tycho's rear gun was.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the ability to shorten the ships yet.
No.
And then at the back, this is still needing to be done by me. We have not Tomahawks, but Exocet.
Yeah.
So that's Type 1. And then I can load up a batch 1, sorry. And then we can load up a batch 2, which looks like the Tycho VLS. That is also a mod from the new threat upgrade or new threat update mod that's out on the workshop. So this was adapted from that. So again, we've got the Mark 5, the Mark 8, sorry, 4.5-inch gun at the front, and then we have a 60-cell VLS at the front and another 60-cell VLS at the back. And again, numbers of missiles, best guess, I put 88 of the Sea Dart VL and 32 of the GWS 26 vertical launch Seawolf missiles, which I thought was a fair enough split.
Yeah, that's a fair enough split. I mean, obviously the vertical launch Seawolf. I'm never quite sure if they could have quad packed it because Seawolf has some quite prominent guidance bins. So it's safer, I think, just to go with one Seawolf per cell, which is pretty much what you get on the Type 23s later on.
Yeah. And this one I put on 2 Lynx helicopters instead of the one Sea King, which gives it a little bit more flexibility because, again, this is a mod. This one's by me. But it gives you the ability to use the sea skewers and things like that. So you've got a nice capability to deal with sort of threats that a ship like this would face in the 90s, like small missile boats, torpedo boats, small attack craft and stuff like that, because you can just send out your helicopter and deal with it.
Yeah.
And
and I think one of the things that probably would happen with this with the batch 2s is that because the Seawolf is most likely going to be moved off to the vertical launch system, which means that the rotary sextuple launchers are going to be gone, is that most likely either the Exocet or Harpoon launchers, which we've currently got on the stern, probably would be moved to the superstructure. That's obviously a little bit harder to do using the Tycho superstructure because it doesn't really have the space for them. But if we were talking about a historical perspective, if that did happen, which it most likely would, then having a pair of Lynx actually makes a lot of sense, because then where you have the aft deck aft of the vertical system, it's not got access to the hangar, but it would make a fairly handy place to quickly refuel and restock a Lynx, which would mean that you could have both of them operating at once, because if one of them needs to come back and have stuff done, it can do that on the aft deck while the second Lynx is being prepared on the main flight deck that has access to the hangar. Or if one's recovering, then the other one can similarly restock on the aft deck. Or if you're just running both Lynxes off of your primary flight deck, you can still take communication or recover other aircraft from other ships, which is also quite handy to have. Weirdly enough, DK Brown's book also mentions that there were studies with the historical Type 43 to see if they could replace the Sea King with a pair of Harriers.
Ooh. Okay, that's an interesting one.
He said the only good thing that came out of that study was that everybody realised that the minimum viable number of Harriers you really wanted on any given ship was 6. You could theoretically fit them on, but it would be so hilariously inefficient as to not be worth it.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting, because then it gives with your 2 little flight decks, it does actually give you even a little bit of redundancy, because you might not want to permanently base a Sea Harrier off of your Type 43, but again, it does give an emergency RTB option
Yes.
for a Type
Yeah.
40 for a Harrier that's in distress if the carrier is either busy or otherwise unavailable at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last weapon system, this time it does have harpoons, and I just forgotten that I hadn't loaded up the NTU mod, which I didn't have the harpoon showing up, but they do show up when I load that up, and that is the 84D version, which goes out to 120 nautical miles. So that's a pretty capable anti-ship capability if it's something expensive enough that you need to use a harpoon rather than just sending a lynx to go deal with it.
Especially if the lynx can queue in where you need to shoot the thing over the horizon.
Yeah, absolutely. And combine them with a sea skewer attack potentially, so that you get extra missiles on target. Right. Well, you very kindly gave me a suggestion of what sort of test we could do for the Type 43, and so what do you think a reasonable threat kind of test would be on one of these ships?
So if you theoretically would have, let's say we're using a Type 43 on escort for a reforger convoy, given its strength, it's probably going to be, say, the northern deployed picket ship. And so we could hypothetically say there's a reforger convoy to our south, but the Soviets are trying to hit that convoy with, say, a couple of formations. A formation, I would probably estimate maybe a formation of Tu-16s first, and then a formation of Tu-22s. Because now, obviously, the Soviets have the capability of launching missiles beyond the range of incoming enemy surface-to-air missiles, so they don't need to worry so much about the vulnerability of the Tu-16s. But if I was the Soviets, personally, I would send them in first, because they can fire missiles to eliminate the escorts just as well as any platform can, either Tu-16s or Tu-95s. And then, while everyone is engaged worrying about those, and potentially if you've got in the larger scope of things, a carrier of some description, even an Invincible, hovering in the background, then any combat air patrol is going to be sent after them, which would mean that if you then follow up with a batch of Tu-22s or Tu-22Ms, they can come in from a different vector. They can also launch their missiles, and they've got the speed to get in, launch the missiles, and get out again before the now out of position combat air patrol can reposition, and that will preserve your far more valuable supersonic bombers for another day. I mean, obviously all bombers are valuable, but some are more valuable than others.
Understandable, yeah. So I've loaded up pretty much a worst case scenario here for Dorsetshire. Hold on, let me turn the sound on. So she is on her own, and she's about to get absolutely attacked by all sorts. I've just left her on, switched all her radars on, and we'll put her on weapons free. But she's kind of straight away can see that there's quite a lot of threats coming in. She is doing it. There we go. Actually functions. Now, I did tell you that there's quite a lot of bombers coming for her here.
Yes.
But you can see there she is able to launch 2 missiles at once. So both arms can fire. And
there goes the ARF launcher.
Yeah, there goes the ARF launcher. So she is able to get quite a lot of missiles in the air quite quickly. That is definitely something she's able to do. I'm hoping we get to see the sea. Well, maybe we don't. Not hoping that we get to see the Seawolf, but we probably will get to see the Seawolf because there's quite a lot of aircraft coming at her. But it does. They do have a target link, even though the game says they don't. So yeah, the missiles are being guided in, and these are 1,000 feet off the deck. These incoming aircraft, so low level, probably bombers. This is
trying to pick off the escort before they go after the convoy.
And here we can go. They're we're detecting an incoming
AS4.
AS4 anti-ship missile, which is bad.
I've climbed on one of those.
Really? Very cool. Where
Yep.
was it?
In the early 2000s, in that very very small window of time when it was actually okay to visit Russia, back when I was at uni, at the Domodedovo Air Museum, they actually have a Tu-22M backfire with one of those things that just apparently arrived on the pylon. They didn't ask for it. They asked for a Tu-22M, but it showed up with this AS4 strapped to it. And
cool.
In classic Russian style, they're like, we don't know why this is here, but we're just going to hit the release and drop it on the ground, so we don't have to worry about it, rotting out the wing root with weight and rust and everything. But it provided a very handy leg up to actually get onto the aircraft itself.
Yeah.
Because it turns out if you give the guide a bottle of whiskey, he'll pretty much let you do whatever you like. So yeah, younger me climbed onto the AS4, then used that to give me the height advantage I needed to grab the wing, which then pull yourself up, do a bit of a pull up on onto the wing, and then walk along the wing to the engine intake.
Very cool.
I'd be interested to know if my fitness levels allow me to do that these days. It looks like we've got our first AS4 interception coming up.
Yeah, I think.
Oh,
I think we hit it. Yeah, hit it with a
Good.
We've also hit a couple of these aircraft.
Whatever they are.
Whatever they are. They don't know, but they're not friendly, so get rid of them. One of the cool things about the game is... Oops, I didn't mean to do that. I told it to fire an extra missile. It will try to identify them. You can see that more on ships. It'll go, it's either this or this, as you kind of get more information from it. It's probably a MiG of some sort. In fact, you can probably
something's gone down.
Yeah, I think it's a squadron of several, and they're merging into one on the radar. But so far, she's doing all right. We're down to 69.
Oh, guns engaging.
Yeah, guns engaging.
This is how we know things have gone very badly. I think that was a Seawolf. Was that a Seawolf, or is that just the smoke trail from another Sea Dart?
I think it might have been a Seawolf. No, we've still got all 24.
Okay. And all weapons. Oh yeah, we're weapons free.
Yeah, weapons free. Thank goodness. Thank you to the developers for fixing that, because no, it did fire a Seawolf. It's firing them from here.
They're firing from ahead.
Which it's still a work in progress. I still need to get rid of the fact that it says Valley Forge on the back as well. But they are functional Seawolf. Oh, it's a MiG-25. There we go.
It was a MiG-25.
Yep. But it's doing pretty well, I would say. Dealing with all this.
Presumably, we've got a US exchange officer on board.
Yeah. I can get rid of that. It's
just funny.
It is, yeah. Sadly, I haven't worked out how to just get whatever number I want on the bows, because that is still something I'm learning. And you can repaint the ships as well. It's a 2D file that's applied over the ship, but that is again beyond my capabilities at the moment.
Yes.
I'm working on learning all this stuff, but yeah, it's firing missiles all over the place. I think it's engaging.
If anybody wants to do a texture pack for the late Victorian Navy black, white, and buff, that would be much appreciated.
Oh, that would be good.
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of of the opinion these days that we should probably go back to those late 19th century peacetime liveries for various navies, because they look a lot better. They're very, very distinctive, and ultimately the grey camo that pretty much all warships sport these days is primarily designed as a visual camouflage. It kind of harkens back to the Second World War, when that kind of thing actually mattered.
Yeah.
These days, almost all recognition is going to be thermal or radar or sonar, none of which are fooled by a coat of grey paint. So why bother?
No.
About the only argument you could make at that point would maybe be with the rise of small mass drones. They might still be doing visual ID.
Mm.
But at that point, even then, a modern 4K camera is not going to have a problem picking out a grey ship against a grey sky or
No.
a blue sea. And at that point, actually having lots of different color schemes depending on the navy might help, because rather than programming the drone to go, it's grey, kill it, you actually have to take into account, well, this one's got a different color scheme to this one, and so on and so forth.
I guess someone could be experimenting with like radar absorbing paint or something, or radar absorbent coatings, and maybe they have to be a certain color. But aircraft aren't grey. Well, they are grey, but they're kind of darker grey, aren't they? Stealth aircraft.
And that's kind of more, I think, as far as I know, I think that's more a case of just it's easier to make that paint color.
Yeah.
And let's face it, at the end of the day, you can make a stealth aircraft appear small enough on radar to be worthwhile. If you're talking about an 8,000 to 10,000 ton ship, there is only so much you can do.
Especially if you want... That is very, very true.
Especially if you want to have masts and your own radar and weapons and so forth. But, even something like a Zumwalt with its sort of very pyramidal superstructure has a reduced signature. It's not invisible.
And yeah, I think a lot of those coatings are quite. I mean, B2s, for instance, have to be kept in those special hangars that are climate controlled and all the rest of it, and that is not happening on a warship.
No.
So it's probably quite the challenge to do that. Well, I think the batch 1 has done extremely well. We can make it shot down 10 MiG-25s pretty easily,
and a Tu-22M.
Yeah. Let's put these guys. I think they flew into the sea.
Whoops.
they were too low. Let's put them a little bit higher. Let's put them at 300 feet, and let's swap for a batch 2 and see how she gets on. Radar's on and weapons free. There we go. There's going to be a lot more missiles this time. The VLS is something else. It's just very, very fast firing. There's almost no delay. Yeah, immediately picked up all the aircraft.
Got something quite close.
Yep, there we go. Straight away. No, thank you. But I think, certainly from playing the Royal Navy, a ship like this would have made... it makes a huge difference. Absolutely huge. Because, yeah, running a Type 42 and a Type 22 together kind of almost sort of works. But one or the other of them usually ends up getting hit by something. And you don't really have a surface vessel that you can anchor a formation around, that you kind of feel, yeah, this is solid.
And I mean, it's also, in terms of the future or our present, it has some rather interesting connotations, because the US Navy is just now beginning to retire its Ticonderogas, although some of the swing arm ones went earlier, which means that for the Royal Navy, you're probably looking at the batch 1s going out of service in the early to mid 2010s, and then the sort of the decommissioning process going on thereafter, and the last few batch 2s probably leaving service around about now, which means you're going to end up with a rather interesting situation of the Type 45, as we understand it, is not going to happen. Because in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's no need for a replacement for something like this. But your theoretical Type 45 is probably then going to come in as a replacement 10 years down the line.
Yeah.
And that is going to face a legacy of not, replacing Type 42s, but replacing this thing, which means in and of itself, the Type 45 will probably have to be considerably more capable, because if we've got 120 odd missiles on this, and with VLS systems could easily be, made to carry Sea Viper,
Yep.
which would have been a system that would have been around since the early 2000s, it would be a very, very difficult sell to turn around and say, well, actually, we're going to design and build a ship that's got less than half that capacity just because.
Yeah. I was looking into that because obviously we've got this strategic defence review coming up next year in Britain.
It was a bad news for me.
It's usually bad news. But I know that they've been thinking about a Type 96.
Type 83, you mean?
Or Type 83, sorry.
Yeah.
But a bigger, kind of...
Yes.
Much bigger, much more capable air defence cruiser, almost, which is basically what this is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've actually drafted up a design and a justification for a very large Type 83 hull, which I'll hopefully be submitting to someone sooner rather than later. Yeah, it's I made the whole. It actually has a good historical basis behind it, but I made the whole when I worked out its rough dimensions. I then proceeded to make it exactly 1 meter longer than the Kirov class, just to annoy them.
Yeah, it's very good.
But yeah, my general theory on that is that it's actually worth the Royal Navy investing in some very large combatants, because if we're going to keep having the manning issues that we have at the moment, having slightly more but smaller hulls isn't going to do you any good if you can only ever put 1 or 2 hulls in any given situation.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you accept that you're going to have 1 or 2 hulls in terms of surface to air defense in a given scenario, your best bet is to have those being the most powerful that you can possibly make them. Oh, something's coming in fast.
Yeah, that's the MiGs. It's still using the Sea Darts. I can manually tell it to fire a Seawolf at them. There we go.
Nope. 25 down. Another one.
Oh. Interesting. So sometimes you're just playing... Oh, he got his bombs off. Trying to get it. Oh, I got it with the Sea Whiz. There you go. Got it with the Phalanx. And the bombs missed.
Hey. That was close.
Yeah, brown alert. I can see him parachuting away. Lovely. But yeah,
someone's going to give the Sea Whiz a medal.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, this is a very capable ship. Very, very capable. And yeah, if you had a couple of these defending an invincible class or a convoy, it would be very, very difficult. Either this or the batch one would be very, very difficult for enemy aircraft to approach it. And you can see the high altitude bombers are about to have a bad time. How many missiles do they have in the air? I think that's 5 or 6. Yeah. I didn't want to go too crazy because you can absolutely, because it's just Notepad. You can just put in any old nonsense numbers you want. I tried to stick to the kind of the capabilities that were there. It would be interesting to try a because these could easily carry Sea Viper or basically any missile, really, couldn't they?
Yeah.
That's been developed since then. Sea Scepter, in theory, they could. Yeah, there you go. A whole bunch of them going down. And yeah, this thing is very, very capable. And nice that it can actually engage submarines and surface targets and stuff as well. Which is, again, something the Navy lost the capability of for a bit, having multi-purpose ships. But it's a very nice ship, and I look forward to making some scenarios with it and actually kind of giving it a proper test. But it handles this kind of situation where it's getting attacked by a lot of Soviet aircraft quite well, even if they are low flying or high flying or missiles. I haven't tried it against the more modern Soviet missiles, but it should be able to it should be able to handle them. None of them are super fast or anything. But thank you very much for designing these ships. And
No problem.
the mod there's still a few things I need to do to get this ready.
Yeah.
So this will be the mod will
I think
be
those
going up.
Su-24s have flown into the sea again.
Yeah, I think they have as well. So the mod will be going up after the video has gone live. So there will be a link to it down in the description. And I'll also put a link to a certain book for a certain author who, if you've got some Christmas money, a very good book on HMS Belfast, I believe.
Yes. Yep. Yes. If you're watching in the States or in North America, it's available on pre-order now at USNI. If you're watching in the UK or anything that's not the North American continent, there will be an international distribution option coming soon. TM. Look at my channel community updates. I'll let you know when that happens. And there are going to be a few other things with signed copies, and if I can persuade IWM to let me do a launch event at HMS Belfast as well, that might happen.
That sounds really cool. Well, thank you again for indulging my very silly idea to put this into the game, and a really fascinating look at kind of a period of the Royal Navy's history where they were kind of just left without any new vessels at all until, well, kind of very recently. Yeah, a shame that these ships don't exist in real life, but we can enjoy them in sea power.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. But thank you again, and very Merry Christmas to everybody. And we'll see you again soon for some more sea power.
See you later.